Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again for being here today. I'm referring to media release from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. It's titled Australia's Fuel Reserves Boosted to Strengthen Resilience and Supply. Can you please tell me how many days in fuel stocks...
Senator Roberts, I am so sorry, but would you mind just giving us the date, and that'll just help officials track down the document you're referring to?
14th November 2022.
Thank you.
Can you please tell me how many days in fuel stocks Australia currently has of petrol, diesel and jet fuel?
Senator Paul Division Head, Gas and Liquid Fuel. I can tell you that under the minimum stockholding obligation that we're required to have, our industries are required to have 24 days of petrol and jet fuel and 20 days of diesel. And as at the 16th of January, and I'll just convert that to megalitres for you, we had 1,699 megalitres, so more than the required 24 days of petrol. We had 2,780 megalitres of diesel, more than the required levels under the MSO. And for jet fuel, we had 547 megalitres of jet fuel, which again is above the MSO obligations.
Thank you. Are those days of fuel reserves in Australia? Are there reserves in Australia?
They're either in Australia or on the water, or in Australian waters, but yes, they're in Australia.
So that counts on water stocks or reserves held overseas?
Not reserves held overseas, Senator. Reserves held in Australia or in Australian waters.
So it's in Australia and how many in Australia?
Do we have I'm not sure if my colleague has the breakdown of what's in the country.
Physically on Australian shores right now?
Chris Kane, Acting Branch Head, Liquid Fuels Branch. Senator, the stockholding obligation enables the entities to hold stocks or count stocks that are being held within Australia's exclusive economic zone, and that's taken as part of the total number. So they are in Australian waters on the way to shore.
So it's the waterborne reserves are inside our economic zone?
Correct.
Okay. So we're obligated to keep 30 days, that's 3 months of fuel reserve, by international agreements, correct? And plain common sense says we should be doing that. So we've got only a matter of 24... How many days does the 1699 megalitres of petrol represent in terms of days?
Senator, are you referring there to the International Energy Agency's oil stockholding requirement, which I think may be different to an international...
Could you explain the difference?
Yeah, so with respect to oil, there is a 30-day minimum stockholding requirement through the International Energy Agency, but I'd just distinguish that. In fact, it's a 3 months and 90 days of net imports is the requirement. I just distinguish that, though, from what Ms Savakis and Mr Kano just gave evidence of, which is the minimum stockholding obligation domestically imposed by the government to ensure fuel security.
So what is the difference between the international agreement for 90 days or 3 months and our own, hopefully common sense-based requirements?
So crude oil, 90 days, international energy oil.
And some of that is stored overseas?
Yes, held in the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
So how is that a reserve for us on shore here? If China puts in a blockade on us, or anyone else puts on a blockade on us, that's gone.
Yeah. So, Senator, I'm just trying to make sure you don't conflate what are two different frameworks here. So the one that Ms Savakis and Mr Kano are referring to is a domestic fuel minimum stockholding obligation. That applies to petrol,
that was in the
diesel,
release
jet fuel.
From your department on the 14th of November 2020.
That's correct. And then the International Energy Agency's 90 days of net imports requirement. That's around crude oil, and that's obviously a separate...
So how many days of crude oil are in Australia right now or within our economic zone on a boat?
So the last reporting was November, and we reported 50 days of
in
holdings.
Australia?
So no, because as part of that we're able to count the holdings, the Australian holdings in the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
So for someone sitting at home watching this, concerned about our oil security and a blockade by a foreign entity, foreign country, What sort of security have we got? 50 days.
I might just clarify that evidence, Senator, is that...
Whose evidence, yours or Mr Duggan?
Mr Duggan's evidence. So we don't currently have any stocks in the US stock reserve that's been sold. So the IEA days that Mr Duggan has referred to, so the international obligation days.
The 90 days?
The 90 days. So we currently have 55 days of stock in there. And the way that is calculated is... And this, I might just help explain why it's 55 days and why we haven't met the 90 days, is the way that's calculated is total eligible stocks divided by the net imports. And because Australia has been importing more fuel, it brings down the calculation of IEA days, the 90 days, which is why we're tracking for 2023.
Could you explain that again?
So IEA days, the 90-day international obligation, is the total eligible stocks divided by daily net imports in the previous calendar year.
So daily net imports, not daily usage.
Correct. So this is why they're two different calculations. So the IEA days are about imports, and because Australia is producing less fuel and importing more, it means, just by basic mathematics, that the IEA day count will start coming off. But that does not mean in any way that we are fuel insecure, and because the government has made a number of interventions, like measures to ensure our fuel security, including through, as I described, the minimum stockholding obligation that means that our importers and producers must hold a certain amount of stock in Australia. So, in fact, we are more fuel secure now, despite the IEA days. It's not the 90 days.
So we've got basically 3 weeks, 4 weeks of processed fuels, diesel, petrol and jet fuel, either on our ground or on ships near our coast.
In our waters.
So that's all.
Do you have the days? Just skip us 2 seconds, Senator, please.
So it's 38 days of petrol, 24 days of jet fuel and 31 days of diesel.
38 petrol.
24 jet fuel and 31 days of diesel.
31. So that's...
Senator, can we take something on notice which might help you? I'm pretty confident those numbers are reasonably higher than they have been in the past. I don't have it here. It's just a recollection I have. So to give you the full
picture... So you're saying these numbers are higher than what we have in the past?
Yeah. So, but I'd like to test that, and I'd like to come back to you on notice with that.
So, okay. Yeah. Minister, what do you think has the government done any work to determine what is a reasonable and safe level of jet fuel stocks, diesel stocks, petrol stocks? I mean, the country runs on hydrocarbon fuel. Like it or not, that's a fact. Transport, food, agricultural production.
You're right that it's extremely important, and it's been an area of work for the government, and the Secretary can talk you through the details.
Yes, I was just going to say, Senator, just to be clear. So the government back in, I think it was in the middle of last year, 2023, set what it regarded as the appropriate minimum stock holding obligations.
Current government in 22.
Correct. My team can correct me if I'm getting this wrong. Answered the question you've posed. So it made a judgment about what is the appropriate minimum stock holding obligation for those 3 fuels. And so to give you an example, the minimum stock holding obligation for petrol is 24 days. I understand it increases at some stage to 27, but at the moment the country holds 38. So petrol is one where the judgment, the answer to your question, what's the minimum required, is 24. Current holdings are 38. So that's a pretty good picture.
All the figures that have just been given are above the requirements, but there's still only a maximum of around 4 or 5 weeks. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, respectively.
Senator Roberts, we're going to rotate the call. I believe they've taken on notice. Maybe you can have something... Oh, I was going to say we can come back to you.
Could I get on notice the derivation of those figures?
Yeah.
Please?
Yeah, we'll take that on notice.
The number of days?
Yeah.
Thank you.